We are living in a world where the richest 1% hold more wealth than the bottom 95% combined, a mirror reflecting deep, deep spiritual imbalance. So I'll share with you my links as we move through this. One second here. Okay, so you can see this on the Oxfam website. The world top 1% own more wealth than 95% of humanity as the shadow of global oligarchy hangs over the UN General Assembly. Over a third of world's biggest 50 corporations, worth 13.3 trillion, now run by a billionaire, or has a billionaire as a principal shareholder. Global South countries own just 31% of global wealth, despite being home to 79% of global population. So it's Oxfam urges multilateral action to advance on new global framework on tax, canceling debts, rewriting intellectual property rules, and so on and so forth. So this is such a huge topic that goes into the spiritual realm as well. And that's what I'm going to be focusing in on because that's my realm. And what does that actually mean for us? And where does this root in and where will it lead us? Where will it take us? It is a spiritual one. It's not just about how much money some people have and how little others survive on. It's about what we value, what we worship, and what we hoard, and what we've forgotten. And without wealth equality, humanity cannot advance spiritually. Impossible. And because we're not able to advance, because we're not able to move forward, it's turning us into a problem. And I want you guys to check out, I'm not going to replay it because every time I do, I get copyright dinged and then, all of that. So, but there's this interview on YouTube with Peter Thiel and Douthat, Ross Douthat of the New York Times. And around the halfway mark, check that around the 38-minute mark or somewhere around there. Ross asks, or Mr. Douthat asks Peter Thiel, do you think humanity should survive? And he was speaking about surviving AI. And they dove into transhumanism, into the Antichrist. And so the question was, do you think that humanity should survive AI? And Peter went all, I don't, yeah, yeah. And I'm not even exaggerating. Check it out. And then after almost a minute where Ross like says to him again, wow, that was a long pause. That was a long, having to reflect. Um, Peter says, yes, but humanity would have to finally solve its problems. That's what he's saying. And I'm I'm sitting on the fence on that one because we've all gotten upset at the state of the world. We've all gotten upset at humanity and how things are going and so on and so forth. And some of the factors we contribute to, absolutely, and we need to change that, right? So personal growth, personal development, all of that. But some of the factors are outside and beyond our control. Kind of like what the Unabomber wrote in his manifesto. If you haven't read that, you need to check that out. By the way, the Unabomber is another video that I'll be doing soon because that's a topic that is huge, especially in this day and age, and his manifesto. So we're gonna deep dive into that. In any case, without equality, without moving out of survival, being able to move out of your day-to-day survival, there is no spiritual growth. There is no growth into a human being that is artistic, that is freer thinking, that is explorative, inquisitive, that is open-minded, because everybody's locked in survival, which means I have to protect my resources. I have to protect the little that I have. I don't have enough to survive. And this is why I can't be open-minded towards other people in the world. I can't be open-minded towards different cultures because I don't have enough to live. right? So this survival thinking is what then runs through all of it and keeps people from being able to expand, keeps people from able to grow. Happiness as well. Like we learn better when we're happy. We learn better when we're relaxed. We learn better when we're not juggling 500 things at once. So even when it comes to learning personal development things or learning things about our own selves, we're not going to be able to do that unless we clear this wealth inequality issue, which causes people to be locked in survival mode. So, right now, the richest 1% of the global population owns nearly half of the world's wealth. And the gap between billionaires and the rest of us isn't just widening, it's accelerating. And that's why I'm making this video. During recent global crises like the pandemic and the cost of living spike, the wealth of billionaires soared while billions of people fell deeper into poverty, debt, and instability. But this isn't just numbers on a chart, you guys. This is families, like, this is a real experience. This is families losing their homes, people not being able to have, afford a family even because they can't even afford their home, right? And you're not going to be raising kids in an apartment. You want a home for the children to grow up in. And of course, people do it, but it's not the ideal situation. So a lot less people are doing it. So children are going to bed hungry, even in so-called developed worlds. Elderly people are choosing between medicine and food. It's systemic, yes, but it's also a metaphysical issue. The pentacle is inverted. We are living in the inversion on so many levels because wealth at its root is energy. And when energy becomes blocked, hoarded, or distorted, spiritual sickness sets in. And that's what's going to happen to our cultures is this spiritual sickness that is going to be, we've been thinking it's going to be exposed, but not only is it going to be exposed, it's going to be nourished, it's going to be fed. So, as of mid 2025, the richest 1% collectively control roughly 46% of global wealth, while the bottom 50% share less than 1%. Since 2015, that elite group has increased its wealth by some 33.9 trillion, enough to end global poverty 22 times over, you guys. 22 times over. No human being has to go hungry. No human being has to live without a house or a home. No human being has to go without education. No human being has to live the lives that some are living right now. It is absolutely unnecessary. And considering the whole big picture of us floating on this rock together through space, nobody knows where we're coming, where we're going. It's incredible that this is the game that we've chosen to play. So, in the US alone, the top 1% hold about 38% of wealth, and that share climbed sharply during the 2020 to 2023 experience as billionaire fortunes surged by almost 70%. 70%. So there are databases where we can check this. And like I said, I'm going to, post this here, but let me open up these two links here where global wealth inequality is rampant. And on Statista, it says here global wealth is concentrated at the top. This is true for all countries to varying degrees, yet, according to the World Inequality Database, in almost all nations, the richest 10% hold more than 50% of personal wealth, while the bottom 50% hold at most 10.4%. The United States ranks towards the top for the unequal distribution of wealth, surpassing European countries. Its wealth distribution has become more unequal again recently, an instance which is now potentially continuing with the latest Republican budget proposal that aims to give tax cuts to rich Americans while limiting social services. The Republican-controlled United States Senate and House of Representatives in late February both passed budget blueprints, and the versions now need to be reconciled, and so on and so forth. Again, this is, but whatever, and it's not anymore about oh, you can work as hard as we did, and maybe then, you can make it too. That's still the story that's being sold. And unfortunately, a lot of parents are still being raised like, are raising their children like that. Go to work, get a good job, get a good degree, so on and so forth, which is true to an extent. But we need to look at the system and at the structures that we're perpetuating and perpetrating. The experiment didn't work because these structures were put in place to protect the vulnerable. That's the whole point of living together in a society that is organized in the way that our societies are organized, to protect us from anything that could happen from nature, of course, and from the elements through housing and homes, from medically through our medical system, to educate us not to make the same mistakes in the past and to develop better and new systems through our education system. But instead, all of that has been hijacked. All of that has been taken from us. And so now it doesn't work. It's not protecting the elderly. It's not protecting the single moms and kids. It's not protecting the vulnerable. It's not protecting children. It's not even protecting men. It's fragmenting our men through the way that people have to work, the way that they have to live their lives. And that's part of the what I'm going to be addressing in the Unabomber manifesto. He wrote about that. He wrote about that. And I shouldn't be laughing, and I'm not laughing at the situation. There's nothing to laugh about at the Unabomber. But it's incredible because he was on a genius level, as I'm sure you guys know. And he wrote about how the people are being trained to conform to the system rather than the system serving them, the system supporting them, the system protecting them. Rather than that happening, people are being forced to conform to the system, which is an artificial being that we created to protect us. So, um, yeah, continuing on. The what created this? Because what's really interesting is when I look back to earlier times, and I've mentioned that in my previous videos before, we haven't moved out of the feudal system. We're still stuck in a feudal system, a global feudal system. But when we look back to the earlier times, people believed in what was called the great chain of being. And although I'm not saying let's go back to that because that it had its own set of perks, and thankfully we've evolved out of it. What that means for those of you that have never heard of this is that people in medieval times believed that God gave them their position. And so if you were born into a family of bakers, it was your position to learn baking and become a baker yourself. And it was seen as highly, stupendously ambitious, challenging fate, challenging the gods, challenging God himself, if you wanted to evolve out of that and change your life. And so it was only a very few, every now and then, here and there, people that would jump off the family wagon and would do something completely different. And they were always seen as, the black sheep of the family or what have you. But generally speaking, if your father was a watchmaker, then you were going to do watchmaking. If you were born into this social class of merchants, then that's where you were going to stay. You weren't going to move into priesthood. You weren't going to move into kingship. Okay. And so it wasn't shaken off, this belief, even though it runs through our thinking even nowadays. Even nowadays, it's still there in our thinking. And but it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that this kind of broke open, where that made it more possible for people to leave their villages and towns and go to big cities and make something of themselves, right? Make something of themselves. So it's even though this concept of the great chain of being may seem to belong to the medieval past, it's still residually everywhere, woven deep into the architecture of our language and our collective psyche. We still, for example, imagine higher and lower as moral categories. So the higher self, base instincts, fall from grace, right? We still speak of climbing the ladder, rising in the ranks. This hierarchical thinking is just there. And so even our spiritual imagination is still vertical. Angels above us, demons below us, heaven is up, hell is down, when it's all around. Like there's no direction to it. But the way we think, the way we classify concepts and thoughts, it just immediately becomes coded as such, right? So, hmm the human striving in Middle Ages up until even turn of the century, turn of the last century, not this century, turn of the last century was all about alignment with the divine, becoming a more perfected human. It wasn't necessarily about personal status elevation that was seen as rather gauche, but it was becoming more refined towards truth, beauty, and the divine. And Enlightenment thinkers spoke of perfecting man in terms of reason and moral virtue, but not necessarily of wealth. And ambition and power has always existed, not saying it didn't, but material accumulation, the way it is today, right, wasn't necessarily the societal metric for self-worth. And remember, I don't know if you guys remember reading that book, Louise Alcott's book, The Four of the Four Sisters or Five Sisters, Little Women. That's it. And around Christmas time, and Americans do this, Canadians do this, around Christmas time, it was the norm to go out. Actually, it was expected that you go out if you were of a certain class and that you gave to the poor and needy, that you cooked the turkey and that you passed around the community some giving back. And nowadays it's elective. Back then, though, it was absolutely something you had to do, especially as a woman, right? So things have really, really, really changed. And what has changed? Predominantly how we see money and being able to freely engage in the pursuit of what makes us come alive, right? There's a kind of a little knick to it. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Don't get me wrong. We have to do that, but just, being fully aware that this is what comes with it, right? So paying attention to everything. But we also live in a time where nearly every form of social validation is intertwined with money. Whether it's social media status, how many followers do you have? How much, like, people don't even lift. This is how the algorithm works, right? People don't stop and listen to the message. If you don't have the following number that they think would justify or say that, yes, you're someone legitimate or worthy of listening to, just based on the number of followers. We all know it's wrong, but people do it. That's just how they take, right? So self-worth is monetized through hustle culture, productivity, side gigs, travel, fashion, lifestyle. We've spoken about this. So many people have spoken about this. Art, spirituality, relationships, and even health, right, have become industries. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be receiving payment for this clearly, right? That's a whole other topic because some people are saying, oh, it should be free. It's never been free. If you went to shamans back in the day, you were bringing your goats, your sweetgrass, and your whatever you were bringing, your tobacco. Okay. You were bringing time. You were very humble and you were waiting until the shaman had time to see you and not, oh, I have an appointment right now and you're 5 minutes late. Sometimes I remember when I was seeing shamans that were off the beaten track and really, hard to get to know, I'd be waiting for hours. We were waiting, a friend of mine and me were waiting for 6 hours one time. And he told us 7 p.m. We were there at 7 p.m. and he didn't start working with us until about 12 in the morning, right? Midnight, 1 p.m. ish. And I couldn't believe it. And it was totally normal though. And I had to learn to humble myself because there were people that were going in before me. And so in any case, things have really, really, really changed. And so there's this shallowness that has gotten infected all of this. Back to it's never been free, right? Even in Europe here, people gave their entire lands, their castles and their lands, they gave to get a ticket to heaven when they passed away, or they would donate all kinds of monies to the church, which is how the church became so powerful and wealthy, right? The church didn't start printing money, it was given to them. So people saying, oh, this should be free and so on and so forth. Nothing is free. You are a part of a cycle of life, right? And if it is given to you, it is expected that you give back. And so people have to start realizing this, right? That they're not outside of life and life has to convince them to come back into the cycle or convince them to participate, but that you are a part of the cycle of life. So, freedom and success, back to my actual topic, are nearly always portrayed in material terms: owning, earning, growing a platform, traveling. Like it's always about money, having more money. And this doesn't mean that everyone is inherently shallow. It just means we're living within a system that rewards, defines, and amplifies material visibility over true inner development. And that wasn't the case in the past, right? It wasn't the case in the past at all. So the cost of this is that widespread anxiety, burnout, and spiritual emptiness is just everywhere. Many feel that they're never enough. Many feel their worth is really low or pegged to external validation. Many have no idea what it means to live in their own rhythm or live at their own pace. And even authentic desires to grow spiritually get hijacked by consumerism as spirituality becomes a product category. So we live in a world that glorifies accumulation, that celebrates domination, that praises the self-made millionaire, but forgets the invisible labor behind every empire. Wealthy people also identify with their assets. That's another whole thing, right? Is the identification with money, wealth, numbers on your bank account. And people pull that through their identity and say, this is who I am. I am this number in my bank account. I am this money in my bank account, which is absolutely ridiculous. And as you can tell by me doing this, how ridiculous this is what I am. And so wealthy people identify with their assets, inheritance, wealth, and roots, just like people that have no money identify with not having money, right? Which makes it harder to break out of that and to actually make money because that's part of your identity. So, and they also like it because flat out, it elevates them above the footfolk. Because if people were willing to really be equal with everybody else as much as they say, they would. But what's the secondary benefit? I'm better than you. And that is really hard to give up. That is a protection. That is people think it's insane, right? If you think about coming to say that their money doesn't belong to them, it's some crazy um, socialist view of things. But almost every religion, every spiritual route is trying to teach people not to get attached to anything, that nothing truly belongs to you, even if it's in your name, even if it's in your, and that doesn't mean, oh, the money in your account is literally not yours, right? But it is literally not yours, coming from a spiritual context. This is partially why Jesus said it's going to be easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a wealthy man to get into heaven, because of that identification with it. Mediums, you guys know this. Things have spirits attached to them, even after death. Even after death, humans are attached to their things and will come back and haunt them, right? Haunt them, watch over them, get angry if somebody inherited it that they didn't want to have it, and so on and so forth. That this attachment energy is incredibly powerful. It's really, really, really strong. And So as they identify with this, it gets harder and harder and harder to do what they're actually meant to be, is to be a faucet of abundance into the world, to be that funnel through which all is poured. As I'm speaking this, it's raining outside. And I'm thinking of, you're turning on your faucets and water comes through. It's raining outside, it's coming from clouds, right? So there's always some kind of a medium which brings blessing to the world. And these are people that are able to bring great blessing to the world. But instead of bringing the blessing to the world, they're hoarding it out of fear. And they're stopping that flow of life, quite literally, because life put them in that position. And what do I mean by that? Let's take Bill Gates. Everybody loves to shred Bill Gates. I get it. Trust me. But at the end of the day, he created companies that have hired thousands and thousands of people. Thousands, if not millions, of people have gone through Microsoft, have worked there at some point on some level, whether it's a cleaner, whether it's a department head, whether it's whatever it is, globally, right? People have worked at this company. So this company provided those people who weren't able to make it for themselves, to gain that money for themselves, to make that money for themselves. It provided a vehicle through which the universe could provide sustenance, could provide support, could provide protection to these people as they move through their lives. So this is we have to start looking at things from a more expanded viewpoint, and then it all becomes kind of clear. This this realm that we're in is inhabited by many different species and beings, but also many different people of different intention by the universe. Of course, we have free will and we can go along with that intention or we can go against it. And we're seeing what happens when it goes against it is we're blocking the universe. We're blocking the flow of energy and of life. We're blocking that creativity, that beauty, that upliftingness that would actually elevate us into a true golden age. And so this is what's happening with these wealthy people because they're identifying with their wealth. They're identifying with their inheritance and their legacy and their 400 years of family and so on and so forth. And so they're holding on for dear life because otherwise, what do they have? And if they lose that, then who are they? So spiritually, this kind of imbalance comes from forgetting our interconnection, from seeing others as competition. Again, survival. This competition comes from survival because what are we competing for? Food, resources, survival. It's rooted in fear, fear of lack, of death, of irrelevance. And it's also fed by a distortion of masculine energy, unchecked, extractive, linear, endlessly conquering, more, 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 which is unsustainable. The earth groans under this imbalance. Communities fracture. And even the wealthy become prisoners of their own fortresses because when wealth becomes an idol, and that's what's happened, it cannot satisfy the soul. We have elevated wealth, even though nobody wants to really acknowledge it and be totally honest and radically honest. And that's the only thing that's going to help us right now is radical, clear honesty. We have elevated wealth into the position of God. And we justify it by saying God is quiet. We don't hear him, right? God never says anything, so I got to do what I got to do. And so everything that we do is pulled through this lens. Literally everything is pulled through the lens of wealth. Will it make me money? Is it worth my time? Is it sometimes things are worth your time that are not going to make you a dime? Absolutely nothing. Nothing, but things have become so transactional that it's demoralized the next generation. And but that's a whole other I'm going way far ahead. So let's get back. Carlene, come back. But It's such extreme wealth concentration. And this is part of the problem is that people worship wealth so much that they worship those that they think are super wealthy, even though these people are extremely dangerous, have dangerous ideas for humanity. A normal system wouldn't even be given the time of day. Without their wealth, they wouldn't be able to advance those ideas at all. And we end up supporting them and in supporting our own demise, right? So, such extreme wealth concentration translates into political power. Billionaires are shaping policy, public services, and global governance beyond democratic control, if there is even democratic control anymore. Back in Davos in February, the Spanish president, he started speaking about this. He was saying, I didn't like his, to be honest, I don't like his solutions, which is more control. And I think it's a little bit utilizing the situation to push something that is also not in our interest. But this is a topic that is now being definitely spoken about, looked at. Whoops, sorry. And here we see it. Davos Day 2, Spain's PM warns tech billionaires threaten democracy. And he held this whole speech and said that Spain's PM accuses tech billionaires of wanting to overthrow democracy. And in a way, I feel he was addressing people like Peter Thiel, right? Who are getting all involved in politics because they feel that this is what's going to support their solutions to the world's problems. And oh, lordy, 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 lordy. So you can check that out. While public aid and climate funding have been cut, right? Calls for a global 2% wealth tax on billionaires have gained traction in Brazil, Germany, Spain, and at the G20 level. They're looking at it. They're looking at it. But that's not going to happen, right? We all know it's not. So globally, personal wealth grew about 4.6% in 2024, yet 1.6% of adults hold nearly half of the world's 470 trillion in assets. That's a wild number. I don't know how they arrived at that, but they did. And 1.57 billion people share just 0.6%. On a spiritual level, extreme inequality arises from forgetting our interconnection, right? Prioritizing accumulation over reciprocity. It's fear driven, it's a fear of lack, of death, of insignificance. Wealth hoarding reflects a distortion of collective energy. It's blocking the flow, it's fracturing communities, it's building systems built on domination, and just expanding that feudal system from the Middle Ages. Those excluded from circulation sense it as collective trauma, numbness, anxiety, anger, spiritual emptiness. And these are things that, emotions that are running rampant through all of our societies right now. And that was said by Klaus Schwab, also at Davos, I think in 2021 or 2022 at some point. Be prepared for an angrier world for sure, because things are going to, and they're going to get that way because we, I have to be careful what I say on this platform. So moving on, the energetics of hoarding, what happens spiritually? Energetically, money is meant to circulate. It's a current. It's a currency. It's an expression of life force. It's an expression of the abundance of the universe. It's sparkly, right? Like sparkles, like magic. So when money flows with love, intention, and reciprocity, it becomes a blessing. When it's trapped in vaults and hedge funds and offshore accounts or used to manipulate markets or by politicians or lobby, it becomes toxic. And the soul of humanity knows this. We know this. And that's why so many people are exhausted, angry, and numb. And so many people are like thinking, it's me. I have to change me, which is true. right? Absolutely. But what is also true at the same time is that you cannot be healthy in a sick society. So it's really difficult to find that middle ground. And so there's a dissonance between what the heart knows is right and what the world keeps rewarding. It becomes a spiritual trauma, a fracture between the soul and the system. And it's also really bad, this whole situation, because people know that there's something wrong. And the way we're built as human beings is we need to take action. We have the freedom of taking action to make things better for ourselves. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to see something, register, oh, this is not good, find a solution to the problem, implement the solution. But what is happening is that agency is being taken away from us. We have no agency on this level of fixing this problem. Powerlessness results. Feelings of futility result. Feelings of it's not worth it anymore result. And this is not good. So, money can be viewed as materialized spiritual substance, a representation of energy and human intention. It's energetically neutral until we apply meaning to it. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is, right? It's like the axe in the wood, axe that you use to chop down wood. Is it good? Is it bad? There is nothing to it. It's what the human being does with it. So, a lot of people speak now of addiction, like we're addicted, as the Unabomber also said in his manifesto. We're addicted to money, we're addicted to technology, and we're locked in a relationship with it, like a drunk person, who wrote, left in a room with a vat of wine or something like that. An alcoholic with a vat of wine. So it's we have to break this addiction. We have to break this addiction. And it can be utilized like everything for blessings, but we have to break the addiction to utilizing it for power. And that is going to be really difficult because as long as people identify with it and see themselves as powerful and in a more protected position against the elements of life, the elements of the earth that are so scary, and so, the elements of weather, the elements of eventualities, it's going to be very tricky for people to let that go and to admit that they're gaining benefit out of it even. So wealth inequality, you guys, doesn't live in statistics, actually. I can list all the statistics I'd want to. It doesn't live there. It lives in the refrigerator, the rent bill, the impossible choice between heat and healthcare, right? It's not abstract, it's a personal experience, a daily personal experience. Food insecurity is on the rise. Over 2.4 billion people globally faced moderate to severe food insecurity in 2023, and that's up 122 million since 2019, according to the FAO. Even in wealthy nations like Germany and the UK, food banks have become survival hubs, and the demand has reached record highs. And I'll just share that with you as well here. Share screen. So we see the growing hunger. This is from December 2024. And are sounding the alarm. Charitable organizations across Germany are sounding the alarm as food banks struggle to meet the surging demand for assistance. These vital institutions, which have long been a lifeline for vulnerable populations, are now having to ration the amount of food they distribute to those in need. The situation is dire. People relying on food banks has soared by a staggering 50%. 50%. So in a country known for its economic stability, I grew up here and I haven't seen things the way they are now. Like I've never. And this increase in food insecurity is a stark reminder of the widespread impact of global crises. Homeless people. When I was younger, of course, homeless people existed, right? Unfortunately. But to the extent that they were in parts of Canada or the US, I never saw that. I never saw that. I'm sure people are here that will correct me, but I honestly never saw that. But now, wow, right? So predominantly elderly, um, people at a disadvantage in the society in some way, shape, or form, right? So, and here for the UK, this is Trussell, and this is the key stats for the UK: 2.9 million emergency, 51% increase over the past 5 years. That's incredible. That's incredible. So again, you can, check this out on your own. And hmm. So, and unfortunately, as a result of this as well, is that ultra processed, unhealthy foods are cheaper than fresh whole foods. So, because of that, people are buying that stuff and everybody's telling you eat healthy, eat healthy. So, there's an added stress on top of it. And stress is what creates this whole cycle of chaos in your system. So, now you're stressed out on top of everything else that you're not able to eat healthy. And it's as if this is being done on purpose. It's as if. So, it creating cycles of malnutrition, obesity, and disease in low income communities. And food is life force. This is a fundamental freaking right. And when access to nourishment is blocked, it disconnects people from their bodies. That's what I was saying before, right? To regarding survival, being locked in survival mode. It disconnects people from the earth and especially from their dignity. Again, we identify with everything that we go through. So hunger breeds shame, not just pain. In spiritual terms, it signals a society where abundance is hoarded and life force is withheld from the collective. Housing. In major cities, rent prices have doubled or tripled over the past decade. Home ownership is out of reach for most young adults. People have been speaking about this all over, everywhere. BlackRock, Vanguard, and other investment giants buy up housing en masse, creating artificial scarcity. Over 1.6 billion people globally lack adequate housing in the US. Over 500,000 are unhoused. A home is not just shelter. It is rootedness, safety, and psychic boundary. Without it, the soul floats unanchored. A society where homes are investment vehicles while people sleep in the streets is a spiritually disassociated one where the material replaces the sacred. This is absolute. It is so far beyond rotten. It's not even funny. So when Peter Thiel says, I don't know if humanity should survive this, I of course he's wrong. Of course he's wrong, right? So, the elderly, discarded wisdom. We need the elderly anchoring in our societies. And this is all these little things, lack of home, food scarcity, the elderly being treated the way they are, is contributing to the decline in having children. So all of y'all, that are out there screaming and yelling, they're killing us off. Our race is being decimated and so on. How about you take care of this and see what happens? How about you take care of this and see what happens? But in the US, and it's easier to get the numbers from the US, sorry, you guys, but over 9% of seniors live in poverty. And in developing nations, it's far worse. So I'm taking the US numbers as a kind of a guideline clearly and obviously, because in the other developed nations, it's not going to be much more or less different. Pensions are shrinking, retirement is delayed. They just changed that. In France, there were last year, the year before last year, I think, they were rioting because they were changing the pension age. They were adding 2 years to the pension age. In Germany, when I grew up, it was 64. Now it's 67. So life-saving medications are often unaffordable. In Germany, US, and Japan, US, the cost of aging is being privatized, not shared. The elderly are the carriers of memory, ancestry, and long view perspective. When a culture discards its elders, it severs itself from time, from roots, from continuity. It's not just ageism. It's like a soul amnesia. And there's no feeling of continuation. There's only feeling of burden. And this is something that a lot of young parents are not going to be too open about or talking about because it's really bad to talk about it, but it's the truth, right? Is when you're alone with your child, and how many single mothers are afraid I've seen a couple on TikTok that have admitted they're happy that their children are with the fathers because the fathers have families. And the families, take care of the children. The children are growing up with everything that they need. But they, after the separation from their father, they had nothing. They only had their job and maybe a handful of friends, maybe, right? And if you can call these people acquaintances, friends. So having children became this really heavy um, heartache. And it's not that you don't love your child, but it takes a village to raise a kid. You can't just, do it all by yourself. You need that support system. And so if you're clearing out the support system that is naturally baked into this whole human experience, then guess what's going to happen? People are going to say, I can't do it. Healthcare. Health as a privilege. In many countries, even those with public systems, healthcare is tiered. So wealth equals better treatment, faster access, better outcomes. The US healthcare system, while the most expensive globally, is ranked among the worst for equity and efficiency. I think the entire world knows that. And yet nothing is being done, and people still drive all over the place and do their thing. And nobody really seems to care. Somehow life goes on over there. We don't know how looking in from the outside, but I guess you guys do because nobody's really doing anything about it. So, chronic conditions in poor communities go untreated for years. Mental health care is still a luxury for many. When health becomes a product rather than a human right, the body itself becomes a battlefield of class, right? And people that are in a different racial category as what's categorized as normal, right? They know about this when the body becomes a battlefield of class and the full ramifications of that. Healing is withheld unless purchased. Spiritually, this breeds deep collective disassociation, a culture split from real intelligence, from true intelligence. The culture is now like Adam and Eve in the garden. It's running to cover itself up with leaves and justify itself instead of recognizing, whoop, we went a little bit off track there. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And it leaves people trapped in survival mode. The young people, the lost future, there's the lost generation that was the pre-Second World War generation, right? This one, this last one, is probably the lost future generation. So home ownership for millennials and Gen Z is down 25 to 30% compared to boomers at the same age. And I don't even want to get into that gap intellectually or anything because the I think this must be the biggest generation gap ever on the planet is between Gen Z and boomers. Like the biggest generational gap in so many ways. Um, uh, but the solutions that worked for boomers are not working nowadays. They don't work anymore, right? So we can stop telling these kids to do things a certain way, right? And we can share with them what we did for sure. But the problems that they're facing are definitely a different category. So, student debt, stagnant wages have created a generation where full time work often doesn't cover rent, let alone dreams. And we keep saying that over and over. So many people have said that, with a salary of like, I don't know, 47,000 back in the day in the 50s, 60s, like that was wealthy, like upper, right? Nowadays, that's barely covering everything, anything. Many delay or abandon having children, buying homes, or building lives due to economic anxiety. We've spoken about that. And so there's a stagnation of potential, imagination, and renewal. Generation unable to dream or invest in their dreams or in their future is a signal that the soul of a society is withering. When young people lose hope, society loses its future. And they know this, and they still continue to siphon off what we need to survive. So every system that withholds food, housing, care, dignity, and hope from its people is not just unjust, it's spiritually bankrupt. And the experiment didn't work. What was supposed to protect us is now eating us, and we get nothing in exchange. As a matter of fact, we're supposed to adapt to that system. We're not just facing an economic crisis, we're walking through a collective initiatory threshold. And will we remember that every being is sacred? That wealth must serve life, not replace it. That AI must serve life, not replace it. Or will we let the soul of the world be sold off piece by piece? So what do we do with this knowledge, right? And I'm like, okay, now I've gone through all the, the worst bits of it. What do? We can't collapse into shame and resentment, but we can rise into clarity. We can recognize that every choice we make, how we spend, save, share, earn, is who we support is part of the collective ritual. So we can call back the soul of wealth. We can dream new systems into being, ones rooted in fairness, beauty, and enoughness. We can invest in our communities and not just in capital. We tithe to the future, not just the past. And so many people have spoken about that. Part of the egoic expansion that has happened in the last couple of years. Like back in the day, you support your friends. Like your friend opened up a clothing store and you'd go and you'd support them, and but nowadays, you particularly don't go to that friend with a clothing store because what? They can't think they're better than you know? And it's almost like, as a sign of friendship as well, it's taking that step back and letting them do their thing and not getting involved. It's really bizarre, but people will go and spend hundreds and thousands on corporations and brands that don't care about them, that put toxicity into everything. And they'll feel comfortable doing that because it doesn't trigger them. It doesn't make them ask, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my dreams? Rather than go and support a friend who's just building up their business and who they know is building up an ethical business or trying at least. So we call that communities that invest in each other and not in a transactional way. We tithe to the future and not just the past. This isn't about hating the rich. It's about releasing the distortion because a world that works only for the few is not a world that's going to last. And the true wealth of this earth, its mystery, love, creativity, and care, we still have to discover that. We still have to discover how would that work in a society if it for once it just actually really truly worked. So let's start seeing money as a flow, not a fortress, as a river, not a castle, as a currency that should circulate in service, that should spread throughout the land and make the soil like moist and fertile. And community building. Spiritual practice invites conscious earning, intentional spending, and radical redistribution. How about we align personal decisions, how to earn, save, invest with values of fairness, healing, and reciprocity, support structural changes through, you know, uh, reading up and getting informed about it so you can support it when it shows up really teeny tiny all the way at the bottom somewhere. Progressive methods, progressive movements, public investments, cooperative ownerships as part of spiritual activism embracing justice and care. So, wealth inequality is a mirror, like everything else, a dark mirror, but also a sacred one. It reflects our forgetting, but it invites, as it reflects our forgetting, it invites us to remember, not just out of justice, but of the sacred circulation of energy itself. Let us become the vessels through which right relationship returns with money, with power, with each other. Wealth inequality reveals not just economic imbalance, but spiritual inversion. And when flow becomes lockdown, community becomes competition, and abundance becomes separation, the soul of humanity fractures. Compassion goes out the window. All of these higher virtues that people used to live by, that people used to try to aim for, go out the window, that they wanted to develop themselves for. All those books that you guys are reading from the 1920s, they weren't doing it to make more money. But nowadays, everything is being done, even personal development. And the outcome is supposed to be so I can make more money, so I can be better at business, so I can work my way up the ladder. Because people have lost hope that this system can be changed. And what's interesting to me as well is this system hasn't existed that long. This is not the Roman Empire, you guys, which has existed for over 1,000 years. This is the last century that things have been like this. So, in any case, let's remember the sacred circulation of energy. Let dreams of fairness, generosity, and shared prosperity become conscious ceremony. And may we stand as vessels through which healing returns to money, to power, and to each other. Okay. Check me out over on my Patreon. I'll be diving into some other topics there. And yeah, the links are in the description box below. Of course, I'm here if you would like a session with me to see the potentials of your life and of your future and what's the right pathway for you forward. If you need clarity, I'm definitely here to support you in that. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.